Hello, lovely people. Welcome to part two of my August reading wrap up.
Dooby 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 doo. Dooby 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 Sophie vlogs.
If you missed part one, I will link it in the description down below. Otherwise, I'm just going to dive in. Same little disclaimer as last time. The hay fever is here. I'm going to cut out all of my sneezes. I'm going to do my best. Shall we kick off with The First Woman by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi? I believe after having read this, I realised that this has another name as well. I currently cannot remember it. A girl is a body of water? A girl I I will put it in the description down below. So you might have read this book under a different name. I don't know if it's like a UK US thing, not 100% sure. This is exploring the Ugandan origin myth of the first woman, but it is like positing it in I was going to say contemporary, but I think it's like the 70s in Uganda's history. And so we're following Kiribo, who she grows up with her grandfather and grandmother in like a village. They're like very, very important in this life. So she has very like privileged upbringing there. And her father works in the city and she's never known her mother. And so where this begins is like she has a real wish to understand like where her mother is, why her mother left her, and all of that kind of thing. So she goes to visit this woman who is her grandmother's like enemy to try and find out. And she's also experiencing like these moments where like she leaves her body and she like observes things from above, thinks that something terrible is happening. So this woman is believed to be like a witch, so that's why she goes to visit her. How this is posited on the back is I thought that this search for her mother would take up a lot more of the text, but it really isn't. Like, this is very much like a slow paced book where we have sections and then the next section we've like skipped ahead in time a lot, and we're really following Kiribu from like a very young age to sort of like a young adult age. And in doing so, as well as seeing like her own personal journey with like familiar relationships and like going to boarding school and deciding what she wants to do with her life and this like romance that she has and that kind of thing. We're also looking a lot at like Ugandan history, particularly to do with like Amin's regime and that kind of thing. Her mother is definitely like a thread in this, but it is a thread that is actually not as present as I thought it was going to be based on the blurb. This is one of those novels that I think like how I would describe this is that it is all about the journey. So I think like in my reading would have liked it if there was a bit more of a destination, and it was only upon finishing it that I sort of was like, oh, okay, we're not really about where you end, we're kind of about that process of getting there. So with the power of hindsight, thinking about it in that way, I'm like, okay, yes, I see that now. But I definitely think that because I was expecting more of like a culmination to the end of Kiribo's story, I think. um so that's just something that I'm just like still pondering, having now finished it. I think certain sections definitely were more interesting to me than others. My favourite section absolutely is the one that goes into the backstory of Kiribo's grandmother and this other woman and explains like the history of their relationship and all of that. That was like by hands down my favorite chapter, and actually I found that more interesting than some of the stretches of Kiribo's story herself, just because like sometimes I found it a little tricky, like and I realized that I'm imposing like my ideas of behavior, but there's some conflict in the relationship with this guy that she has that I just was like, throw the whole man out. And I realize that that is like in some ways the point, because this is really really looking at like feminist thought and like how feminist thought manifests itself in Uganda, and like what like this guy that Kiribo has this relationship with in like considers himself a feminist, and what does that mean. And one thing that is established very early on is that this woman that Kiribo goes to, who she believes is a witch, and all of this like is like highlights to her like when conflict happens, women will turn on women because they cannot turn on the men, and like keep an eye out for that. And so that's an interesting thing to like hold in mind reading all of these events and seeing the ways in which Kiribo herself like is falls into that trap of like things happen, and then the aggression manifests itself from woman to woman rather than the man involved being held accountable and that kind of thing. So it was definitely like a really interesting look into like what feminist concerns in Uganda would be, and then specifically because this is set during like the 70s and that kind of thing, like a particular like time period and that kind of thing. After that we have some non-fiction. This is Fashion in the French Revolution by Aileen Ribeiro. This was just a really interesting look at the development of fashion during the French Revolution. I find fashion history really interesting because actually it tells you so much about politics and also about like different class politics and that kind of thing, like how people choose to dress themselves, particularly in a time such as the French Revolution, where so much of your personal safety comes down to how vocally and clearly you align yourself with different causes and that kind of thing. It can be your downfall, it can be your saving. It's such a time of like, particularly during like the terror and stuff, like such a time of like increased observation of other people, and like if you don't manifest your politics in X, Y, and Z, you're in danger of being accused of being like counter-revolutionary and all that kind of thing. So it's so fascinating. I really enjoyed the bit that is exploring like the influence of like, there was a whole section where like classical Rome was being like harkened back to, specifically Rome, because that was like what a lot of the political system was like for some people being aspired to. So there was this whole like branch where like women wore very like classically inspired outfits but in like a very like idealized kind of way. And then like obviously as like different factions develop, like later you had a faction that was in favor of like restoring the monarchy, and they would represent themselves with like certain things and all this kind of thing. Like it's such a interesting way of being able to trace politics through how people dressed, and not just how like the people in power dressed, but how the common people dressed, all of this kind of thing. So this was like definitely, oh, here's an example of like the classical influence on the fashion. This has, as well as like pictures throughout, it also has a section in the middle which is like full color fashion plates. That was super duper great. I really like when non-fiction books reference things a lot and then they put those picture references alongside. This relates to my part one wrap up, but I should have mentioned that Uproar does this a lot. Like all of the prints that she's talking about in detail are put in this book, which I really appreciated. We'll briefly mention a DNF, and I DNF'd Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. Not because this is bad, I know this is like everyone's fave cozy fantasy at the moment. I got this out on audiobook, but I had quite a few audiobook holds come through at the same time, and so I had to give it back because I renewed it too many times to be able to refresh it. So I got like 25% of the way through. It's perfectly fine. I think maybe I'm not in the mood for a cozy fantasy where not a lot happens, because I was like perfectly enjoying it. Travis Baldry does the narration himself. It's lovely, but also I didn't really feel like a drive. You know, when you look at the amount of time that you have left on an audiobook and how long it takes and how little time you have left on your library hold, and you're like, it's not possible. I'm not going to blitz it in that way. It would defy the point of the cozy fantasy for me to like panic blitz it. So I've let it go. I might come back to it. I might put a new hold on. It's just, it took a really long time to come through. So I'm just like mentioning, we'll see what happens. Will it turn up in a future video? Maybe, perhaps, perchance. The next two books are both ones that I have read because of my try chapter tag, which I will link down below, but there might not be any point now that I'm about to tell you about some of the books. First one is the one that I was most excited about from that video, and that is The Animals at Lockwood Manor by Jane Healey. I was so taken with the prologue of this. This is set in 1939, and it is with the outbreak of World War II, museum collections were being evacuated to like great houses and that kind of thing. And so we follow Hetty, who is, I'm going to sneeze so badly. We follow Hetty, who is in charge of this taxidermy collection. She comes to Lockwood Manor. Lockwood Manor is sort of like, it's that situation of like, is it haunted? Is it not? And then while she's at Lockwood Manor, like things develop and she begins to wonder, like, would they have just been safer in London? So there are two narrations from this, and the one that really hooked me during the try chapter tag is the first narration, which is Lucy. And Lucy is like the daughter of this house, and she is very deeply haunted by a lot of things. her mother and her grandmother recently passed away, and her mother, they all thought that her mother was mad. She spoke about this woman called the Woman in White who like haunted her. And Lucy, like as this goes on, is really like uncovering things from her past and that kind of thing. And this has this real like thing that I do really like in Gothic fiction, where it's like, number one, the house has an ominous presence, and it's like, is the house safe? Is the house like an entity? You know, I really like that. And then also like these things which are haunting you, are they real? Are they imagined? Can you trust yourself? Like, what is happening? I definitely really like those things in Gothic fiction, and they were like present in this. I think they were a lot more present like for me at the beginning. I was really feeling those. The actual like manifestation of a lot of this like haunting stuff is that like we talk about the idea of a woman in white. That happens, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And then like animals. Oh, this animal is in a slightly different position. Oh, this animal is in a different room. And you know, like there's only so much of like just an animal, stuffed animals moving around, that after a while I was like, I get it. Is someone moving the animals? Like, or are they haunted? You know, like you... And then the other sort of like thread in this is that like Lord Lockwood, who is Lucy's father, is just like horrible. So there was just like a stretch of time where it was like, has an animal moved in the night? Lord Lockwood says something mean. Has an animal moved in the night? Lord Lockwood says something mean. And I wanted more like unhinged, like Gothicism. There are a lot of references in this, and like specifically there are a lot of references to like Wilkie Collins, Woman in White, Jane Eyre, Rebecca, for sure. And I liked those nods. It's just, you know, sometimes like a reference does not a book make. And I wished that this had broken out a little bit more outside of like making references to things, and had actually just like, again, been an unhinged, haunting tale. So, like, those are some of my critiques. Something I really liked about this is that it very much ties the tension of the beginning of World War II into the tension of this house and all of the things that may or may not be happening. Because there's almost like this impatience that it's like, okay, war is announced, but nothing's happening yet. And it's almost like they wish that they were just like in the depths of it, because then at least they could do something. Whereas until that happens, they're just like stuck in this strange limbo, in the same way that it's like the people in this house are just like stuck there. Like, I really enjoyed that sort of like paralleling of experience. That was really fun. There's a sapphic romance in this. I always appreciate a sapphic romance. I will say, like, I think partly the wish to do a romance sort of took over from the wish to write like a gothic tale. I don't know. I don't feel like those things were married very well. I think that I don't know. This is one of those books that I'm like, I wanted to love you so much. There's like on the tin, there are so many things that I'm like, I love. And then actually, like, it was fine, and I had a fun time, and I enjoyed it. But I feel frustrated by it because I wanted to come away with like sparkly eyes and be like, this is an amazing gothic haunting thing. And instead, I'm just like, it's fine. You might like it. You might not. You know, and that's disappointing. The other book that I read because of the try a chapter tag is Nine Perfect Strangers by Liane Moriarty. I didn't know anything about Liane Moriarty going into this. I've like heard of her. So I spent like so much of this book trying to figure out what genre we were in, because it's set in like a health resort. We have nine perfect strangers who have all come to this health resort for like various different reasons, and the solid like 50% of this is just sitting with these characters in this resort, finding out a bit more about them, about their backstories, what has brought them here, how they're finding the resort. So at about halfway through, I was like, maybe that's what this book is. Maybe we're literally just like, this is one of those novels that is just focused like on people, on their interior journeys, and we're just like literally walking through with these people as they're working out whether or not they can deal with these reasons that have brought them here. There is a twist, and I now know that Liane Moriarty does books with little twists in them. I had no idea. I just genuinely didn't know. So from about the point that the twist happens, we rocket off into some places. We really, like, it really, like, snowballs. And this is one of those books where I'm like, I had a really fun time reading this, particularly when we hit the point where, like, stuff starts to kick off. I was like, okay, fun. And we just like wheeled off into some places, and I was like, I'm just going with this. Wild. Let's do it. I did suspect that something might happen because on the cover you have all these chairs lined up, and then on the back cover, like one of them is knocked over, and I was like, ooh, something's gonna happen. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel like I would read more Liane Moriarty for sure. I do feel like spending about half the book waiting for something to happen feels like quite a lot, and maybe that could have not been as much of the text as it was. Also, you know when things just go like wildly off piece and you're like, I don't really know how to apply like logic of reactions to what is happening right now because we've just left reality behind and we're just in a place. So I had a fun time. I would not reread this book. I feel like I probably would check out another Liane Moriarty if you had recommendations. I don't think it's like incredible, but I did enjoy it. I don't know. You know, you're like, I don't really know how I feel about a book. That's how I feel. Penultimately, I read In Pursuit of Flavour by Edna Lewis. Sorry, I didn't write down her last name and now I've forgotten it. She's a very, very famous, influential Southern American cook, chef, I don't know. This was such a lovely read. This is essentially a cookbook, but there are lots of writings about food in it, and so I read it for the writings about food. It's actually very hard to get your hands on this book in the UK, so I bought it on my Kindle because it appeared to be the only way of getting it without it being horrendously expensive. And I've never been to America, I've never been to the South, so I'm not familiar with a lot of the dishes she's talking about, but it was really lovely to discover them. My favourite thing about this is just like the glimpse of a time that I don't think is really here anymore. Like the way this is published in the 80s, but Edna Lewis is talking about she grew up in Freetown, Virginia, which was founded by freed slaves, and they did a lot of growing their own food, raising their own animals, like fishing from the streams, that kind of thing. So she describes the way that she describes food when she was growing up is like this really like this world that I've never experienced, which was so interesting to get a sense of. She talks a lot in this about how like things don't taste like how they used to, and I don't know whether that's a case of like our food has changed so much or if it's just like that's memory, isn't it? Like things never taste how they tasted when you're a child because you were a child and you're experiencing all these things in this way. But I feel a little bit like that with like how she talks about like growing and preserving and all that kind of thing. It's like, yeah, you don't do that anymore because that's not how most of us get food. I'll say I'm not sure how many of these recipes I will make. That's just because of my own allergens. That's very dairy heavy. I will say there's a lot of dairy used in most of the sections. It's like split by like vegetables and then like meat and then fish and then desserts and all that kind of stuff. But I don't even if I never cook a recipe from this book, I've enjoyed reading it. And it was very comforting and very soothing. The final book that I read was The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. This is the very first Poirot novel where he makes his first appearance and Hastings makes his first appearance. It was very interesting reading it from that perspective, like establishing this character that I am by now very, very familiar with. And establishing Hastings as well. I took a view with this one where I was going to mistrust everyone that Hastings trusted and suspect everyone that he... No. Mistrust everyone that he trusted and suspect anyone... Why is that frazzling my brain? Essentially, I was going to do the opposite of what Hastings was doing. And that did help me out for a while. It did not help me solve the mystery, nor did the fact that the version I was reading didn't actually have some of the clues in it, which was great. It was like, here's a copy of that letter we found, and then, because I was reading it on my Kindle, it was like, there's nothing here. So that was really helpful. I did not solve this mystery as a result. But I found it very interesting. It's always fun when you read like the first book of something that sets out something because I feel like people are always developed much more in like sequels and you get to see them much more as like fleshed out things because Poirot was his most like caricature Poirot, like Hastings was his most like bumbling, like takes everyone at their word, doesn't examine his own biases. There's like a recurring thing in this where Poirot, like things come out and he goes to Poirot and he's like, why didn't you tell me? And Poirot was like, you had all the information. It's not my fault if you're not clever enough to put it together. That's just quite funny. I will say that there's like a few moments, at least in my edition, which I think was like a recreation of like the first original print where there was some like unnecessary words and stereotypes used. I think the more recently printed versions take these out, specifically stuff like use of the N word, which was extremely jarring. They contemporary versions just take those stuff out and they've replaced it with other things at print. But I got mine from Project Gutenberg, so it was just like a recreation of the original print. So just a word of warning there, Agatha. What's up with that? I had a real craving to read an Agatha Christie murder mystery because we're sort of coming into not like quite autumn yet, but like the start of autumn, and that makes me want to read like mystery things. And I think because this didn't really bring me the gothicness I needed, that I felt like I needed to provide like a murder mystery to myself. That's everything that I read in August. Quite a reading month, I think. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these. Or what did you read in August? I feel like August, I don't know, I didn't have much purpose in August. I feel like I just read wildly and off the cuff, which sometimes I really like to do. I get a bit antsy if I read too many like TBR things. And I know I have some stuff planned coming up, so I'm like, let's just go with the mood. And it's taken us all over the town, apparently. But yeah, I would love to hear from you if you want to leave a comment down below. But otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you next week for something different.